Buying a home in the United States has never been more expensive.
Home prices have been rising again for several months.
Average monthly payments on a new home soared to about $3,322 in the third quarter of this year.
However, if you can make the numbers work, being able to purchase a home is still one of the best ways for everyday Americans to build their net worth. Just take a look at this chart comparing the average net worth of homeowners versus those who are renters. And so in today's video, we're gonna go over exactly how much home you can afford based on your salary. Before we jump in, I want to bring a quick word from today's video sponsor, Credit Karma. Credit Karma is a resource that I've been using since my college days. At the time, it was to keep tabs on my ever-growing credit profile. But over the years, Credit Karma has become a central part of how I keep tabs on my everyday finances, and they were especially helpful during my first home buying process. I was able to very quickly and easily keep visibility on my credit profile to make sure that I didn't do anything that would actually jeopardize my mortgage interest rate. The Credit Karma platform also has a number of mortgage resources available, from new loans to refinance options to educational material. So be sure to go ahead and check them out today. Now, the rest of the video is gonna break down into two parts. The first part, we'll talk about all the different rules of thumb that you can use to determine what salary you need to purchase a home. And in the second part, we're actually gonna go over 3 examples of people in various stages of life and what type of home they can afford based on their salary. Part 1, rules. When it comes to rules, we don't have 1 or 2, but 3 rules, or I would rather call them kind of frameworks to determine how much you can actually afford based on your salary. The 3 rules that we have can be bucketed as such. 1 is the conservative estimate. 2 is the middle of the road everyday estimate. And 3 is an extremely aggressive estimate. Rule number 1, the 30-33 rule. This actually was published and popularized by a blog called The Financial Samurai, and this was born out of the great financial crisis of 2007-2008 when real estate went belly up. So this one is going to be the most conservative estimate for us. The first 30 stands for spending no more than 30% of your annual income on a monthly mortgage payment. As an example, you have a $100,000 salary, well, you should spend no more than 30% or $30,000 on a mortgage, which means that your total mortgage payments should be less than $2,500. The second 30 stands for having at least 30% of the home value saved up in cash or semi-liquid assets. Think of stocks. So let's say you want to buy a $300,000 home. Well, that would mean that you should have at least about $90,000 saved up. And the 3 represents having a home purchase price that is no more than 3x your annual income. So if you had a $100,000 annual income, your home price should be no more than $300,000. As you can clearly see in the 30-33 rule, it's very conservative. This thing was developed as a result largely of the 07-08 crash, where real estate went belly up, people were losing their jobs, they couldn't afford to make mortgage payments, and they got foreclosed on. And so this tries to account for a lot of that downside risk, saying, hey, spend no more than 3x of your income on a home. And if I ask you folks right now today, hands up if you know someone who's spent more than that, probably a good number will raise their hand. But again, that's why this is probably the most conservative estimate that we have. The second rule or framework is the 28-36 rule, and this is the most widely accepted middle of the road estimate. The 28 stands for mortgage debt, which should be less than 28% of your gross monthly income. So let's go back to the example of somebody who's making $100,000 a year. They would have a gross monthly income of $8,333. And 28% of that is $2,333. And so their housing spend should be less than $2,333. The 36 stands for all debt, and all debt should be less than 36% of your gross monthly income. So the exact same scenario where someone is making $100,000 a year, that means they're making $8,333 a month, then 36% of that is $3,000. So all debt, including the mortgage, should be less than $3,000. The third rule or framework we have, and it's the most aggressive estimate, is the 45-49 rule. And this one's actually very similar to the 28-36, but the difference here is these are the maximum debt to income ratios that a lender is willing to lend on. And so in this scenario, the 45 represents housing debt, similar to the 28, but it should be less than 45% of your gross monthly income. So we take the person who's making $100,000 a year, divided by 12, 8,333, multiply that by 0.45, and that person should be spending no more than $3,750 a month on their total housing housing debt. And the 49 represents all debt, including your housing debt, and that should be less than 49% of your total gross monthly income. So $100,000 divided by 12, multiply that by 0.49, and we get $4,083. You can see clearly with this estimate compared to the 2836, you can have more debt. But the reason I say it's aggressive is because now you have a lot more leverage and maybe a little less wiggle room. Let's say, God forbid, you lost your job. And the other thing to note about the 45-49 rule is this is pretty much the max limit that any lender is going to lend based on. So for them, it's all about risk. If somebody has a 50% or 60% debt to income ratio, you're seen as risky and a bank might not want to lend to you. Part 2. Now let's go over examples. Earlier we talked about all the different frameworks and rules that we can apply. The one thing I do want to say is there's no one exact right answer. Somebody who's more conservative will obviously want to use a more conservative estimate. Somebody who understands a little bit more of what they're getting into when it comes to real estate, let's say from an investment perspective, they might want to be more aggressive. So we're going to run over 3 examples, and for every example, we're going to walk through each of the 3 rules so you can kind of see a little bit what the differences are in terms of what you can afford based on that particular salary band. And the 3 examples we're going to run over are 1, an early grad that's making $70,000 a year. 2, somebody who is maybe mid-career making $150,000 a year. And number 3, a couple who is making a combined $300,000 a year. The first example, somebody making $70,000 a year. Let's apply the conservative estimate. So the 30-33 rule. The first 30 stands for spending no more than 30% of your annual income for a monthly mortgage payment. So 70,000, multiply that by 0.3, we get 21,000, divide that by 12 is $1,750 on a monthly housing debt. The next 30 states that they should save at least 30% of the home value in cash or semi-liquid assets. We're gonna skip this right now and go to the last 3 and come back here because we don't really have a home price yet. So the 3 stands for not spending more than 3x your annual salary on a home. So $70,000 multiplied by 3, you should be buying a home valued at no more than $210,000. With that, we can go back to the 30 earlier of having to save 30% of the home price. So you should have at least $63,000 saved up. So from the conservative estimate, we would say that you should be looking at a home price of no more than $210,000. Now let's go to the middle of the road estimate, which is the 28-36 rule. This one is actually a lot easier because I'm actually using a calculator that I'll throw up on screen to let you guys see what it looks like. We're going to also assume that somebody in this range might have $500 of monthly debt. So think of things like student loans, credit cards, auto loans. In addition, I'm assuming that you're gonna have at least saved $30,000 for a down payment, a 30-year term loan with a 7% interest rate. Then we move down to plug in the debt to income ratios. So it's gonna be 28% for just housing debt and 36% for all debt, including housing. With all of that put in there, we get that the person can afford a home roughly in the $200,000 range with a monthly mortgage payment of about $1,600. And you're probably noticing a quirk here, which is that this middle of the road estimate is actually saying that you can afford less than the conservative estimate. And the reason is because of the fact that interest rates are so skewed. With a 7% interest rate, you're just gonna have to pay more monthly. If the interest rate were cut in half, the amount of home that you can afford is definitely gonna be more than $200,000. So that's just an interesting quirk to note, but it typically is for home values on the lower end. We'll see in the later examples that this doesn't always hold up. And now moving on to the aggressive estimate, which is a 45-49 rule. This one's very easy. You don't have to change any of the variables. You just change the debt to income ratio. We get that the maximum loan that you can qualify for is a home valued at up to $294,000 and some odd change with a monthly mortgage payment of around $2,358. So taking a look here, we can say that somebody who's making $70,000 a year can look to purchase a home that's valued anywhere from about $200,000 to $294,000, depending on their level of comfort of taking risk or whether they might be a little bit more conservative. The next example is somebody making $150,000. Maybe someone who is in mid-career, now they're looking to buy potentially, maybe it's their first home or maybe it's a slightly larger home. Let's see exactly how much home they can afford. So first we'll apply the conservative estimate, the 30-33 rule. This would state that they should be looking at a home that's priced at no more than $450,000. They should have at least $135,000 saved up, and their monthly mortgage payment should be no more than $3,750. Now let's look at the middle of the road estimate using the 28-36 rule. Here we're gonna change some of the parameters a little bit to fit someone who might be more in this income bracket. So we plug in the annual income of $150,000.
I'd assume someone making a little bit more might have a little bit more debt, and so we estimate the monthly debt to be $750. And the plus side of making a little bit more income, I'd assume somebody in this range would be able to save a little bit more for a down payment, so we put that estimate at $50,000.
And so applying the 28-36 rule, we see that they can afford a home valued at up to about $464,000 and some change, and a monthly mortgage payment of $3,500. And now let's take a look at the aggressive estimate, which is the 45-49 rule. This one's very simple. Just change the debt to income parameters from 28 to 45 and from 36 to 49.
We see that this person can purchase a home valued at up to about $711,000 and some change, with a monthly mortgage payment of around $5,375.
And now to recap the person making $150,000.
We can see that they should be looking at homes that range anywhere from $450,000 on the low end all the way up to $711,000 on the high end.
Now let's look at our third example of a couple making $300,000. Applying the conservative estimate of 30-33, we would see that they should be looking at a home value of no more than $900,000. They should have at least $270,000 saved up, and their monthly housing costs should be no more than $7,500. And for the middle of the road estimate, I did change some of the figures around for someone in this stage of life. I would assume that they have a little bit more outside of home debt obligations, so I changed that to $1,000. In addition, with a couple that's jointly making $300,000, I would say that they probably have a little bit more money saved up, so I think that they can afford a down payment of at least $100,000. Everything else we're gonna keep the same. We plug in our debt to income ratios of 28% for housing and 36% for all other debt, including housing, and we see that they can afford a maximum home value of $975,000 and some change with a monthly mortgage payment of $7,000.
And to get the aggressive estimate,
We leave everything the same, but we change the debt to income ratios from 28 to 45 for housing and from 36 to 49 for all other debt, including housing. And we can see that the maximum type of loan they can qualify for is a house that's valued at up to $1.5 million and some change, and a monthly payment of $11,250. And so taking a look here, a couple that's making $300,000 jointly, they can look at buying a home that's valued anywhere from $900,000 all the way up to $1.5 million. So I'm hoping after going over these three examples, you can see that it very much is a bit of an art as well as a little bit of science to determine how much house that you can afford based on your salary. There's pretty wide ranges. For example, the $300,000 couple had a range of $900,000 all the way up to $1.5 million. But as you go through these calculations yourself, you have to think about what kind of financial situation are you in today, and also what is your tolerance for risk? And that'll sway exactly how much home you should be looking to purchase. Of course, let's say given all of this, you're still on the fence of, hey, should I be buying or should I be renting? Well, I actually have a video that I made recently discussing whether or not it would make sense financially for someone to continue renting or to look to purchase a home, and I'll leave a link for that up here. And as always, folks, it's been an incredible video. I'll catch you all next time. Peace.